I agree with the ranking member. We shouldn't be on autopilot. I hope my colleagues would join me in introducing legislation to repeal the AUMF of 1957, dealing with communism in the Middle East, and 1991, dealing with Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. We should also repeal the 2002 AUMF. I agree with the ranking member that we need to revise the 2001 AUMF and put a sunset on it. Ms. Newland argues, well, that will embolden our enemies. That's because everybody in the executive branch believes that when the executive branch makes foreign policy, that they make good foreign policy and instill fear in our enemies. But if, God forbid, Congress has a binding role, then we would make bad decisions and our enemies would be emboldened. Nothing exemplifies this more than what every administration since the Nixon administration has said about everything we're talking about here today. The AUMF is meaningless, and all of our discussion at this hearing and many other hearings is meaningless unless the War Powers Act is binding on the administration. Yet since the Nixon administration, the executive branch has told us it's not binding. They've taken the position that it's really kind of a non-binding resolution, maybe with a few reporting requirements, but that every president can send our troops anywhere for as long as that president wants, whether Congress wants to authorize it or not. And then they work with us on the technicalities of the war powers of the AUMF to humor us, distract us, and pretend like it's important so that we never realize that it's not. Ms. Newland, is the War Powers Act binding on the executive branch? And I'll point out that Senator Biden said yes. What's your answer?
Yes,
It is.
Sherman.
So the administration will follow the law and will not deploy troops for over 60 or 90 days unless authorized by an AUMF?
That is President Biden's commitment.
I might add that I asked that same question of your predecessor and did not get an answer at this committee just a year and a half ago, and I want to thank you for that commitment. Mr. Vicek, as a matter of law, is the War Powers Act binding on the executive branch?
Thank you for that, that question, Congressman. We're certainly aware of the history between the executive branch and the legislative branch on these issues.
Is it binding?
There are certainly, I think there would be general agreement that parts of the War Powers Act are absolutely.
Is the part of it that says you can't deploy troops for over 60/90 days binding on the administration or not? Yes or no?
I can say that this administration has acted consistently with.
Acting consistently, they act consistently with many of our non-binding resolutions. Is it binding or is it just something you choose to go along with?
Congressman, I'm not aware that it's been addressed at this point. I've wanted to
Okay, so we have a disagreement. Your client says it's binding. You say it's not. Every administration is, prior to the statements of Ms. Newland, have said it's not binding. And that's why last decade I put a provision, it's the most important thing I ever enacted into, or proposal that it was actually enacted into law, that says that no money can be spent in contravention of the War Powers Act. Now, Attorney General Mukasey testified before this committee a long time ago that if such a provision was in the appropriations bill, was in the appropriations bill back a decade ago because I finally want to vote on the floor. It's now in base text, so it doesn't get much attention. But it says no money can be spent in contravention. Is that provision binding, Mr. Vilsack?
Congressman, I'm not aware that this administration has taken a position on that.
Well, you realize that you were sitting there when Wendy Sherman, no relation, said that the administration would look at that provision and reach a decision on that. Was she misleading us when she said the administration would look at that?
I do not believe Deputy Secretary
You were sitting
Sherman
right next to her.
Would mislead this committee. All I can say is that I'm not
will
aware.
You get back with a yes or no answer as to whether, in your legal opinion, the money can be spent in contravention of the War Powers Act out of the Defense Appropriations Bill that says no money shall be spent in contravention of the War Powers Act. Ms. Kress, you'll be advising generals. Now and then we say no money shall be spent in the defense bill for this or that, and if they just ignore that, they could, I believe, go to jail. Would you advise defense officials that they could spend money in contravention of the War Powers Act if that money was appropriated by a bill that says no money shall be spent in contravention thereof?
Congressman, we very much respect the role of Congress, and clear language such as no money can be sent implicates, as you say, the Anti-Deficiency Act. We would always comply with that, consistent with our constitutional.
So as long as we put that provision in every defense appropes bill, and we frankly, and I hope my colleagues will join this, should put it in permanent law, you believe that the Defense Department has to abide by it?
Consistent with our constitutional obligations, yes.
Consistent with your constitutional, do you have a constitutional right to ignore it?
It would very much depend on the circumstances. It would be very unusual that we would.
Okay, so sometimes you can ignore laws you don't like,
Only if there's a
depending upon the
constitutional issue.
circumstances. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields.